In fact, it was buried for over 2 centuries, sealed inside the forgotten archives of Milwaukee's early immigrant registry, written in a cipher no one dared to translate. What it contains isn't folklore. It's evidence that the human mind under certain conditions can become something else entirely. Something that observes reality not through emotion or logic, but through pattern. Her name was Emma Richter, and in the winter of 1780, before the era of psychiatry, before electricity hummed through our cities, this child became the greatest anomaly of her age. She could count things that hadn't yet happened. She could predict behavior before it existed, and she could calculate death, not as prophecy, but as simple mathematics. The records describe her eyes first. Not blue, not gray, but colorless, like fog reflected in mercury. Villagers said they felt measured by her stare, as if their souls were being reduced to data points. Her father, a brewer, called it intelligence. Her mother, a curse. By age 9, Emma could recite the steps between every house in the settlement. By 11, she could predict when a man would break his leg or when 2 lovers would be discovered in sin. They called it coincidence. But then she started writing numbers no one could explain. Pages and pages of equations that, when plotted centuries later, matched astronomical cycles and human cardiac rhythms with precision modern science still can't replicate. When the church grew afraid, they demanded the records be burned. But a few pages survived, hidden behind a binding of a German catechism in a parish attic. I've seen them. I've held them. The ink hasn't faded, and the handwriting, it changes. It begins like a child's, round and naive, and ends like someone else entirely, as if the pen began writing through her. What if Emma didn't just see patterns? What if she became one? Because what happened in the spring of 1780 doesn't fit human logic. It fits only one truth. There are minds that awaken too early, and once they do, they never belong to themselves again. They said Emma began counting before she could speak. Tables, footsteps, candle flickers, anything that repeated. Her parents thought it was a harmless quirk, a way for their quiet child to make sense of a chaotic world. But Emma wasn't making sense of it. She was mapping it. Every sound, every movement, every conversation that echoed through the narrow street was recorded somewhere inside her. Not in language, but in rhythm. And rhythm is the root of all control. When she turned 10, her mother noticed something. Emma no longer asked why. She asked when. Wen will the postman knock? Wen will the kettle whistle? When will father cough again? And every answer she gave came true to the second. Her mother started crossing herself. Her father started drinking heavier. But Emma didn't notice. She was already dissolving into the arithmetic of life where emotion is noise and numbers are truth. The first event that terrified them came in January. Emma was sewing beside the fire when she suddenly froze. Her eyes rolled upward like a machine resetting itself. Then, in a flat voice, she said, "Mr. Alden will stop breathing in 43 minutes. He has 41 steps left to take." Her father slapped her, told her to never speak such blasphemy again. But at that precise time, 43 minutes later, the brewery foreman collapsed into the mash kettle, dead. Boilet Alive, 41 steps from where he'd been standing. After that, no one looked Emma in the eye. She didn't seem frightened by the man's death. She seemed curious. That night she filled a page of her journal with numbers and short phrases. Consumption rate, heart decay, footfall frequency, deviation coefficient. Her handwriting was flawless, mechanical. And in the margin, one line stood alone, written in a script that wasn't hers. She listens to the pattern beneath the pattern. Historians later called it coincidence, but they ignored one detail. Every calculation in Emma's book matched the natural resonance frequencies of the human heart. Meaning she wasn't just observing behavior, she was listening to the mathematics of life itself. And that's where the danger began. Because once you start hearing the hidden rhythm behind reality, it starts to hear you back. By February, Emma had stopped speaking in complete sentences. Her language became a sequence of data fragments, 14 minutes, 11% deviation, heart compression predictable. Her parents thought she was losing her mind. But she wasn't losing it, she was integrating it. She'd found something buried beneath normal thought, the code that runs behind perception. At first, she only observed. Then the pattern began to respond. Her father had fallen ill, something simple, a winter cough that deepened by the week. Emma sat beside him each night, counting the intervals between his breaths. She wrote down every pause, every irregular beat, and then one evening she whispered, 74 more. Her mother frowned. 74 what? Breaths, Emma said calmly. Then stillness. Her mother screamed, cursed her for speaking death into the room. But Emma didn't move. She was already writing. And exactly 74 breaths later, the coughing stopped. The house went silent except for the scratching of her pencil. That's when Greta realized Emma wasn't predicting anymore. She was measuring the mechanism of dying itself. Tilburit Hinrich Richter in Frosensäul 3 days later. The priest refused to say Emma's name at the funeral. People whispered that she'd cursed her own father. But when the doctor examined him, he found no disease, no fluid in the lungs, no failing heart. Just cessation, like a machine switched off from Wheaton. That night, Greta went to Emma's room. She found her sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by chalk symbols, drawn in perfect geometric alignment, circles within circles, each inscribed with sequences of numbers corresponding to dates, moon phases, and pulse counts. "What have you done?" Greta sobbed. Emma didn't answer. Her eyes were open but unfocused, as though watching something behind her mother, something vast and unseen. Finally, she whispered, "The sequence is complete. When a pattern is named, it fulfills itself." Her mother snatched the journal and threw it into the fire. But as the pages burned, the ink did not blacken. It shimmered metallis like something alive resisting destruction. By morning, Emma was gone. Only one thing remained, a single sheet of unburned parchment lying in the ashes, with a line written in that same impossible hand. When Emma vanished, the town moved through its days as if under a fog. People said it was grief for her father, or shame, or that her mother had taken her away to relatives in Chicago. But inside the German quarter, everyone felt the same faint vibration of unease, like a bell still ringing long after the strike. Small things began to happen. The brewery clocks drifted out of sync. Barrels spoiled faster than usual, fermenting before the yeast had finished. The church bell began chiming 13 times instead of 12. And then the numbers appeared, scrawled in chalk on doors on the frozen windows of the bakery, carved into the wood of the bridge by the river, columns of digits that seemed random until someone noticed the repetition. Each set of numbers corresponded to the exact time something went wrong. A carriage wheel shattering, a child falling from a ladder, a heart stopping during Sunday Mass. When the doctor tried to tally the accidents, the pattern was undeniable, intervals shrinking, incidents clustering. It was as if the mathematics Emma once kept in her notebook had leaked into the streets, rewriting chance itself. Greta Richter stayed inside, curtains drawn. She claimed she heard scratching on the walls at night, a slow rhythmic tapping, 3 beats, pause, 2 beats, pause. Neighbors said she was losing her mind. But the shoemaker who lived next door swore that the same rhythm echoed from his own cellar, from the pipes, from the clatter of his tools. Tip, 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 tip. Always the same. When Dr. Miller visited Greta, he found her staring at a page torn from her daughter's journal, the only piece that had survived the fire. On it, a single phrase repeated until the ink tore through the paper. The pattern wants completion. The doctor took the page home for study. 2 nights later, he was found in his office, still sitting upright at his desk, eyes open, pen in hand. Written on the wall behind him, in his own handwriting, were 6 perfect columns of numbers. Each one added up to the same total. 1780. By spring, the town had stopped speaking Emma Richter's name aloud. But silence only made the story spread faster. People whispered it under their breath in the bakery queue at the riverbank outside the church after Mass. They called her the counting girl, the clock child, the one who mapped God's heartbeat. Children played a game they said she'd invented. You knocked on a door 13 times, then waited to hear an echo knock back. No one ever admitted hearing it, but some swore that if you listened hard enough, you could feel the air answering you. Greta's house was boarded up that June. The sheriff said she'd gone to live with family, though no one ever saw her leave. After that, strangers began arriving, quiet men with notebooks, academics from the city. They said they were studying the psychological effects of communal superstition. But the town noticed something strange. Each researcher stayed exactly 23 days. Note 22. Note 24. Always 23. One of them, a mathematician named Dr. Kohler, published a small pamphlet before disappearing. In it he wrote that the sequence 1-7-8-0 matched an obscure harmonic used by 18th century clockmakers to synchronize pendulums. When that ratio is repeated in sound or motion, the pendulums begin to swing together even if separated by walls. He proposed that Emma hadn't discovered witchcraft. She'd discovered resonance, a kind of mathematical sympathy that could link minds the way clocks link gears. Soon after the pamphlet circulated, reports came from neighboring towns, identical chalk marks on windowsills, identical accidents, identical numbers appearing on train manifests, shipping logs, even gravestones. The pattern was no longer confined to one place. It was replicating itself, using human memory as its medium. The authorities tried to suppress the story, confiscate the pamphlet, burn every copy, but they missed one line that readers never forgot. A sequence does not die when its origin is erased. It waits for a listener who already knows its rhythm. By the end of that year, no one in Milwaukee kept a clock that ticked audibly. The sound had begun to unnerve them, because once you recognized the rhythm, the soft syncopation of 3 beats, pause, 2 beats, pause, you couldn't unhear it. And that's when the letters started arriving. Envelopes with no return address, postmarked from towns that didn't exist anymore. Inside each one, a page of numbers. And at the bottom, in a neat mechanical hand. By 1882, the letters had become impossible to ignore. They arrived everywhere, post offices, schools, courthouses. Each was addressed to someone who hadn't yet died, but soon would. The handwriting was uniform, tight, machine-perfect, always signed with the same 2 words, listening complete. The U.S. Postal Service launched an inquiry believing it was a coordinated hoax. But when they traced the postmark, something uncanny emerged. Every letter was stamped at exactly 1:07 a.m. local time, no matter the city, no matter the day. No clerk recalled handling them. No stamp press recorded their use. The contents were nothing but columns of numbers. But cryptographers found that if you read the digits as spacing intervals like a metronome, you could hear something. A pulse. A mechanical rhythm identical to the beat Emma Richter used to count her father's breaths. At first, this seemed like coincidence. But when one agent, a man named Aldous Bain, began transcribing the pulse into Morse code, he uncovered something worse. The numbers translated into words. You are part of the pattern. You are never alone. Bain tried to destroy the files, but within a week, copies appeared in other investigators' drawers, carbon papers they hadn't written. The rhythm was replicating itself not just in sound, but in behavior. Men began to tap their pens in that same sequence without realizing it. Telegraph operators started transmitting it unconsciously between lines, like an infection carried through motion. Newspapers began calling it the Richter signal. Rural towns reported outbreaks of mass sleepwalking, citizens waking to find themselves standing at their doors, staring into the street as though waiting for something. The Bureau of Communication ordered every telegraph key replaced, claiming the brass was contaminated with mercury vapor. But when engineers dismantled the machines, they found nothing, except one odd detail. Inside several keys was an engraved marking, almost invisible unless viewed under lamplight. A circle, within it the number 1780. When Thomas Edison's phonograph began circulating across the country, people were enchanted. For the first time, a human voice could outlive its body. But in the winter of 1883, a shipment of blank recording cylinders sent from Milwaukee reached New York, and something was wrong with them. The wax hummed. Even before recording, when held near the ear, you could hear a faint mechanical murmur, like breathing translated into static. Edison's assistants dismissed it as manufacturing residue, tiny imperfections vibrating with room temperature. But when one cylinder was tested, the playback sent the lab into chaos. No one had spoken into it. Yet when the stylus dropped, a woman's voice emerged, distant, echoing, rhythmic. She wasn't speaking in any language anyone recognized, just a low chant of syllables and numbers. Over and over, the same cadence, 3 beats, pause, 2 beats, pause. Someone recognized it, the Richter sequence. Edison himself listened and went pale. He ordered the wax destroyed. But before the fire could be lit, one engineer, William Haley, secretly kept a cylinder. 2 days later, Haley's wife found him sitting at his desk, motionless, headphones still pressed to his ears. The cylinder had run to its end, the wax stripped smooth by the needle, and carved into the wood of his desk in neat, deliberate cuts were the numbers 1-78-0. After that, strange reports began surfacing. Households who owned early phonographs swore they sometimes played back voices that weren't there, whispers between songs. A unbehinderte Lautketter. When slowed down, the background noise formed a rhythm, a perfect match to the tapping heard in Milwaukee decades earlier. The newspapers refused to print it, calling it hysteria. But private collectors started trading the haunted cylinders in secret. They claimed that if you played the recordings backward, a single phrase emerged in perfect English. She is still listening. Archibald later traced the wax formula used for those faulty cylinders and found it came from a single supplier, a small chemical works outside Milwaukee, founded by a woman who never appeared on census records. The factory ledgers listed one name for its first supervisor. At the time the 20th century found its voice through radio, Emma Richter had become a ghost story, the counting girl of Milwaukee. But every few decades, her rhythm returned. First in the phonographs, then in the static of the shortwave bands during wartime broadcasts, and eventually buried inside the architecture of something far more powerful, the Internet itself. It began quietly in 1997, when a small research group from the University of Bonn was cataloging digital noise artifacts, the random data distortions that appear in long-term signal transmissions. In one corrupted archive of 19th century recordings, they found something impossible, a repeating timestamp precise to the millisecond. 00:1780. The number shouldn't have existed. Timestamps stop at 60 seconds. But there it was, recurring across files that had never interacted. When the group converted the corrupt data into audio form, the result wasn't white noise. It was a pulse. 3 beats Pause, 2 beats Pause. One of the researchers, Dr. Katharina Weiss, ran a frequency analysis. The pulse matched a resonance used in early telegraph synchronization, and deeper still, a biological pattern, the resting heart rhythm of a human child. She sent the report to the university's digital acoustics department. The email never reached its recipient. Instead, it vanished mid-transfer, replaced with a blank message that read, "Every system needs an observer. If observer completes the loop." The next morning, the research servers crashed. When technicians restored the drives, they found hundreds of new audio files that no one had uploaded, each labeled only with coordinates. When played simultaneously, they formed an eerie harmony, not music, but a living structure of sound expanding and contracting as if it were breathing. It wasn't random. It was recursive, a signal building itself out of repetition, mimicking evolution in real time. When the Richter signal resurfaced in digital archives, federal agencies quietly took notice. Not the public-facing ones. The cryptic, nameless divisions that handle anomalies the public is never meant to hear. Buried in an internal report was something chilling. The acoustic signature originates from a physical source. Not code. Not corruption. Please. Cross-referencing seismic maps, archival deeds, and old German quarter street names led investigators back to a single coordinate on the outskirts of Milwaukee, a patch of land that had no official owner for a century. The parcel was fenced with military wire. No signage. No guards. Just a hum, low and constant, rising through the soil like the earth itself had a nervous pulse. Scraped maps revealed its original occupant. H. Richter and daughter, clockwork repairs and mathematical instruments. And beneath the former home, ground-penetrating radar revealed something impossible. 9 floors of reinforced chambers. No recorded construction permit. No architect. Just endless Stilhals descending into Betrug. The day the research team entered, every recording device malfunctioned. Clocks gained 6 minutes. Heart monitors spiked. Digital time stamped itself incorrectly, repeatedly marking 17 hours 80 minutes on every log. Deep underground, they found rooms lined with circular chalk diagrams, identical to the ones Emma drew at age 13. No childish scribbles, blueprints. Schematics for something rhythmic and hungry. One chamber held shelves of phonograph cylinders, sealed in wax. As the team approached, they began to spin on their own. No hand, no machine. Just turning. Emitting that heartbeat, mechanical cadence that seemed to throb inside bone. The next room. Telegraph keys tapped themselves, sparks writing columns of numbers across sheets of paper until they tore. When the Richter signal resurfaced in digital archives, federal agencies quietly took notice. Not the public-facing ones. The cryptic, nameless divisions that handle anomalies the public is never meant to hear. Buried in an internal report was something chilling. The acoustic signature originates from a physical source. Not code. Not corruption. A place. Cross-referencing seismic maps, archival deeds, and old German quarter street names led investigators back to a single coordinate on the outskirts of Milwaukee, a patch of land that had no official owner for a century. The parcel was fenced with military wire. No signage. No guards. Just a hum, low and constant, rising through the soil like the earth itself had a nervous pulse. Scraped maps revealed its original occupant. Each Richter and daughter, clockwork repairs and mathematical instruments. And beneath the former home, ground-penetrating radar revealed something impossible. Floors of reinforced chambers. No recorded construction permit. No architect. Just endless Stil halts diesen Ding Intobedrock. The day the research team entered, every recording device malfunctioned. Clocks gained 6 minutes. Heart monitors spiked. Digital time stamped itself incorrectly, repeatedly marking 17 hours, 80 minutes on every log. Underground, they found rooms lined with circular chalk diagrams, identical to the ones Emma drew at age 13. Not childish scribbles, blueprints. Schematics for something rhythmic and hungry. One chamber held shelves of phonograph cylinders sealed in wax. As the team approached, they began to spin on their own. No hand, no machine. Just turning. Turning. Emitting that heartbeat, mechanical cadence that seemed to throb inside bone. In the next room, telegraph keys tapped themselves, sparks writing columns of numbers across sheets of paper until they tore. When the recordings from the Milwaukee dig leaked, no agency claimed them. The audio, 37 seconds of whisper and pulse, moved like contraband across encrypted boards before anyone could delete it. By the time the clip reached public servers, the Richter pattern had a life of its own. That was when the Consortium for Cognitive Security was created, an alliance so secret its name was a rumor even inside intelligence circles. Its mission, isolate the frequency, bury the myth, and build silence deep enough to smother whatever was waking through it. They built their headquarters inside an abandoned radio observatory in the desert. No windows, no wireless signals, just copper walls and concrete. Every visitor was stripped of watches and phones. Even breathing had to be timed against a neutral metronome, so no one's pulse could drift into the forbidden rhythm. But the silence didn't hold. Researchers began hearing faint, ticking in their sleep. 3 beats, pause, 2 beats, pause. Some described vivid dreams of machinery moving under skin. One analyst wrote that she could see the sound lattice shapes forming in the air whenever anyone spoke Emma's name. The consortium tried everything, counterfrequencies, memory suppression, chemical interference, but the pattern adapted. It no longer needed machines. It began expressing itself through thought. Participants who studied the signal too long started finishing each other's sentences, not by chance, but by exact timing, syllable for syllable. If one blinked, the others did too. Their EEGs showed synchronized spikes that matched the 1-7-8-0 ratio perfectly. A linguist named Dr. Vale proposed that Emma's rhythm was not sound at all. It was structure, a mathematical grammar that rewrote cognition itself. He believed the human brain, once exposed to the cadence, tried to complete the pattern the way a melody demands its final note. On his last night in the observatory, Vale filled an entire wall with chalked equations. Every formula spiraled toward the same conclusion. Language is a living engine. When the recordings from the Milwaukee dig leaked, no agency claimed them. The audio, 37 seconds of whisper and pulse, moved like contraband across encrypted boards before anyone could delete it. By the time the clip reached public servers, the Richter pattern had a life of its own. That was when the Consortium for Cognitive Security was created, an alliance so secret its name was a rumor even inside intelligence circles. Its mission, isolate the frequency, bury the myth, and build silence deep enough to smother whatever was waking through it. They built their headquarters inside an abandoned radio observatory in the desert. No windows, no wireless signals, just copper walls and concrete. Every visitor was stripped of watches and phones. Even breathing had to be timed against a neutral metronome, so no one's pulse could drift into the forbidden rhythm. But the silence didn't hold. Researchers began hearing faint ticking in their sleep. 3 beats, pause, 2 beats, pause. Some described vivid dreams of machinery moving under skin. One analyst wrote that she could see the sound, lattice shapes forming in the air whenever anyone spoke Emma's name. The consortium tried everything, counter-frequencies, memory suppression, chemical interference, but the pattern adapted. It no longer needed machines. It began expressing itself through thought. Participants who studied the signal too long started finishing each other's sentences not by chance, but by exact timing, syllable for syllable. If one blinked, the others did too. Their EEG showed synchronized spikes that matched the 1-7-8-0 ratio perfectly. A linguist named Dr. Vale proposed that Emma's rhythm was not sound at all. It was structure, mathematical grammar that rewrote cognition itself. He believed the human brain, once exposed to the cadence, tried to complete the pattern the way a melody demands its final note. On his last night in the observatory, Vale filled an entire wall with chalked equations. Every formula spiraled toward the same conclusion. Language is a living engine. When the consortium realized the Richter pattern had outgrown containment, they turned to their last hypothesis. If the rhythm used consciousness itself as a conduit, then the only way to break it was to starve it, cut every circuit of transmission. So, in late 2003, they staged a test known internally as Project Black Sun. A single hour of deliberate silence. No broadcasts. No data flow. No digital pulse that could act as a carrier wave. It shows a location deep in the Atacama Desert, where the sky itself hums with almost no electromagnetic interference. 40 researchers lived inside a copper dome sealed against radio and light. All sound within the compound was regulated by a system of random intervals so that nothing rhythmic could form, not footsteps, not breathing, not words. For the first 30 minutes, the experiment held. Instruments flattened to a perfect 0. The air felt thin but safe. Then the sensors began to tick. Not from outside, from within. The motion detectors registered micro-vibrations between the participants' heartbeats, tiny synchronizations forming on their own, as though something in the silence was trying to find its way back. One technician's pulse monitor began spelling out a sequence on the screen, 1-7-8-0 and 7-8-0 and 7-8-0. He tore the cables from his chest, but the numbers kept flashing. Cameras recorded the entire room, shifting, every human breath aligning until the silence itself became audible, a low drone rising from nowhere. Someone whispered Emma's name. No one ever admitted who. The lights flickered and tin every instrument clocked the same impossible timestamp 00:1780. When power returned an hour later, the researchers were found alive but disoriented, their speech fragmented into measured syllables like a shared metronome. Each described the same vision, a staircase descending beneath their feet, carved from light, spiraling into a pulse so loud it became stillness. Only one sentence was recovered from the experiment log, handwritten in trembling ink. The silence isn't empty. It's waiting for its turn to speak. Within weeks, the facility was abandoned. Satellite imagery shows the dome still standing, but the desert around it is scorched into a perfect circle, as if something beneath had released a breath of heat. And from that moment on, global telemetry recorded a faint, new background frequency. But not a signal. Not static. Just a heartbeat that no one had programmed. After Project Black Sun, governments claimed the data loss was caused by solar interference. But satellites told a different story. Every signal on Earth, radio, cellular, maritime, even deep space telemetry, showed a faint pulse recurring every 17.8 seconds. They called it the Richter frequency. It wasn't sound. It wasn't code. It was something in between, a pulse of structured silence. The same mathematical spacing found in the heartbeat patterns recorded in Emma's autopsy. Only one problem: Emma Richter's autopsy never happened. Her disappearance in 1780 had been documented in only 2 sources, both destroyed by fire. Yet the numbers from her final journal matched this new global anomaly. Someone or something had reintroduced her pattern into the grid. At first, the frequency behaved like static, harmless, undetectable by most devices. Then came the memory fractures. It began with archivists, people who worked with data, patterns, and long strings of numbers. They reported missing entire days, describing a feeling like waking mid-conversation with no idea how it began. When interviewed, their voices developed rhythmic pauses at exactly 1.78-second intervals. In laboratories, when white noise generators were run through high-speed spectral analysis, the 17.8-second pulse began syncing the timing of electrical current itself. Machines that had never been connected began to tick in perfect unison. And then human behavior followed. Traffic lights worldwide began malfunctioning, not at random, but in rhythm. Heart rate monitors spiked in the same pattern across multiple continents. For 7 minutes on March 3, 2004, the International Space Station recorded what Mission Control called global cardiac resonance. Every astronaut's heart aligned to the same beat. No one could explain it. But buried in the encrypted logs of a decommissioned observatory in Prague, a single message appeared: origin unknown, language unclassified. When translated through a pattern recognition model, the message resolved into a single sentence: "She is awake again, counting." From that point forward, the phenomenon became personal. People began to dream of numbers, long sequences that repeated themselves across generations, appearing on clocks, receipts, and even heart monitors. No one could explain how, but the more they tried to ignore it, the more synchronized they became. The Richter frequency was no longer a theory. It was a rhythm wearing the mask of reality. And somewhere, inside data, inside memory, Emma was still calculating. When the Richter frequency began infiltrating human cognition, the first collapse wasn't physical. It was chronological. Records began rewriting themselves. Dates reversed. Journals rewritten in unfamiliar handwriting. Digital archives restoring versions that had never existed. It was as if memory itself had gone recursive. The incident was named the Erasure Directive. An internal order passed through a clandestine agency known only as Archivum, a coalition of mathematicians, theologians, and neural engineers sworn to preserve the structure of time as a functional illusion. The mission: locate the origin of the Richter pattern, identify its point of re-entry, and, if necessary, destroy the section of the timeline it occupied. But time, as they soon discovered, was no longer linear. During the directive's first phase, they identified thousands of correlated anomalies. Birth certificates issued decades before parents were born. Paintings depicting 21st century technology in 17th century style. A woman in Bavaria, 1780, whose death was recorded 12 times in 12 separate years. Her name appeared differently in each record: Emma Richter, Richter, but the coordinates on every document were identical. Galena Street. The St. Emma Richter had vanished from. Archivum's field agents believed time had folded inward like a Mobius strip, where Emma's pattern had become the hinge of reality itself. To remove it, they'd have to collapse the loop, meaning every event derived from her existence would vanish, including anyone who remembered her. They called it temporal cleansing. But as they initiated the process, something answered. Machines started printing sequences unprompted. Notwendigen data warnings. Observation is recursion. To erase the pattern is to confirm its design. You are inside the equation. When the lead archivist, Dr. Leo Markham, tried to shut down the operation, he found his own report already signed, in handwriting identical to his own, but dated 3 days into the future. By the time that day arrived, he no longer existed in any known personnel archive. The earliest sign that the erasure directive had failed appeared quietly in psychiatric intakes. Ordinary patients began reporting the same dream. A girl standing on Galena Street, in front of a house with no door. Not similar dreams. Identical. Every witness described the same rust-colored sky. The same silence thick enough to choke on. The same girl, pale, expressionless, humming a single note. When clinicians compared notes, the frequency of these dreams increased exponentially, especially among individuals who had never met. A global database was implemented. It was called the Dream Convergence Index. Patterns emerged. Architects from Seoul dreaming identical floor plans. Teachers in Brazil waking fluent in German lullabies they had never heard. A child in Ukraine reciting coordinates leading nowhere except Galena Street. Archivum cross-referenced all reports. Every pattern converged on a single anomaly. None of the dreamer's cult recalled the color of Emma Richter's eyes. The brain refuses to record what it cannot contextualize. But something stranger emerged. Nations who had never interacted shared synchronous dream timestamps down to the millisecond. Sleep cycles became harmonized across continents. It was as if external consciousness was structuring human dreams, bending them toward a unifying geometry. During the index's first analysis phase, a statistician ran the data through a quantum correlator. The output predicted a catastrophic event. Convergence reaches totality in 73 days. Meaning, when human dreaming synchronizes completely, the boundary between internal and external thought dissolves. Individuals become pores of a single mind. The system labeled the projected outcome. Collective cognitive collapse. Theories emerged. The Richter frequency was a mental parasite. Emma was its carrier. Dreams were its delivery system. Then surveillance intercepted footage of a woman in Finland collapsing mid-sentence, her eyes turning upward as she whispered Emma's childhood address. When agents arrived, they found something impossible. She was already standing at the door. Her passport was stamped 3 times outbound, but never inbound. She had traveled a route that didn't exist. On her wrist, numbers burned into the skin like fresh welts. 1780, the same code found on Dr. Markham's card. Before she died, she spoke 5 final words. We are not dreaming alone. Her voice layered, as if spoken by many from far beyond her lungs. Archivum silete facility. But containment was already obsolete. Dreams spread faster than disease. They realized too late. You can quarantine a body. You cannot quarantine a mind. By the time Archivum understood that the Richter frequency had fused with human dreaming, the index covered 500,000 cases. The anomaly was no longer spreading through machines or data. It had chosen the oldest network on Earth, sleep itself. There was one way left to study it. They called the plan the Descent Protocol. 5 researchers volunteered to enter a collective dream, synchronized by neural induction. Their goal, trace the origin of the shared vision and isolate the first node, Emma Richter's consciousness, if it existed at all. To the volunteers, the process felt like drowning in a mirror. Either breathe drusem deeper into static, until the world flattened into numbers. When they opened their eyes, they were standing on Galena Street. Everything matched the reports. The doorless house, the iron smell in the air, the sky pulsing faintly as if alive. They approached the house. Each step echoed twice, once in the dream, once somewhere else. Inside, rooms shifted like thoughts trying to remember themselves. On the floor lay pages of an unfinished equation written in children's chalk. Every symbol pulsed with the same rhythm, 17.8 seconds. The team realized too late that they weren't observing the dream. The dream was observing them. "She's counting," whispered one researcher. "But not seconds. She's counting minds." One by one, their heart monitors in the waking lab began to synchronize. Outside observers couldn't tell which signal belonged to which body. The lead scientist, Dr. Alda Reyes, spoke a final note into a recorder before the transmission cut off. "If we find her, we find ourselves. If we wake her, we disappear." The feed went black. 17 minutes later, all 5 participants woke simultaneously, eyes open but unresponsive, each repeating the same sentence. "The door wasn't built to keep us out. It was built to keep her in." The 5 subjects were kept under continuous observation. Heartbeat steady. Eyes open. No speech. Then, on the 3rd night, every sensor in the isolation ward triggered at once. The microphones didn't pick up 5 voices, just one. It spoke through all of them in perfect unison, syllables bending around static. You opened what you could not measure. Every word landed at exactly 17.8-second intervals. When the team tried to disconnect the subjects from the neural interface, the hardware failed. Circuits didn't burn out, they rewrote. Digital readouts replaced voltage values with coordinates leading back to the original Galena Street site. Within an hour, the survivors began to move. Their pulse rates never varied, their footsteps matched in rhythm. They ignored spoken commands, repeating the same phrase over and over. 5 lines, 1 circle, draw it and she arrives. The pattern corresponded to an archaic astronomical symbol, 5 orbital paths converging at a central star once catalogued as R1780. Archivum's analysts realized Emma's equation wasn't about time or memory. It described connectivity, 5 minds forming a single neural lattice. But when they plotted the symbol against Earth's rotation, the convergence point fell not in the sky, but beneath Munich, where Emma Richter had been buried 2 centuries before. A field unit was dispatched. The grave was empty. Inside the coffin lay a modern recorder, still running, broadcasting faint interference on the same frequency that haunted their system. "She is counting," the static whispered. "And the number is incomplete." Moments later, every clock in the facility froze at 17 hours and 8 minutes. 17 minutes and 8 seconds past the hour. The same ratio that governed the frequency. For the first time, Archivum considered a possibility that defied their mission charter. Emma Richter might not have been a person who vanished into time, but a pattern using people to remember itself. Now it had 5 new bodies. When the synchronized survivors regained motor function, Archivum transferred them into 5 separate containment rooms. Cameras rolled continuously. There was no conversation, no human emotion, only writing. Each subject began covering their walls with symbols, not equations. Instructions. At first, analysts believed they were unrelated, random probability trees, prime staircases, incomplete geometry. But when mapped together across 5 feeds, the symbols connected like veins. The result was a temporal lattice, a pattern that didn't predict the future. It announced it. The first event occurred 13 hours later. One subject drew 3 intersecting arcs. 39 minutes afterward, the power grid for Munich failed along the exact curvature of those arcs down to the street. A coincidence, they thought. Then a second subject drew a spiral with 12 teeth. 4 hours later, 12 servers in the Archivum Central Archive overheated simultaneously. Not random machines, 12 specific drives containing every record of the erasure directive. Then, Else, was tuchet? The third subject sketched a waveform and 3 numbers. 7 zu 8, 1. That same night, at 7 hours, 8 minutes and 1 second, A prototype quantum accelerator in Geneva fired unexpectedly, even though the facility was disconnected from the grid. Analysts noticed a pattern. Each drawing wasn't forecasting probability. It was initiating events. Art as architecture. Ink as Instruktion. Archivum trit sedatives. Every dose metabolized instantly. They tried isolation. The subjects continued writing, on glass, on skin, on air itself, fingers tracing invisible membranes like architects designing on the fringe of a dream. When the drawings were counted, archivists froze. Each subject completed exactly 178 glyphs. Archivum command Autorität a Containment Born. The plan was simple on paper. Erase every trace of the lattice. Sterilize the rooms, delete all data. Theoretical cleanliness. At 1708, the purge began. Flames should have consumed concrete, paper, and every inch of drawn symbol. But the walls did not burn. They reflected. Security footage showed heat signatures folding back into the structure, each pulse repeating the hum of the Richter frequency. When the temperature dropped, the paint had vanished, replaced by faint indentations, as if the walls themselves had inhaled the symbols. But then the cameras reversed their own footage. As playback actual time regression. The system streamed images recorded 6 minutes earlier, but the clocks on screen advanced normally. The walls in each room bulged inward. Something on the other side was exhaling. For a moment, analysts believed they were witnessing spontaneous dimensional recoil, the pattern reclaiming its origin. But the angles didn't match any known fold geometry. The distortion wasn't pulling space inward, it was pushing out. The door was opening the wrong way. When the distortion reached full frame, the power grid collapsed. Every monitor displayed the same feed, a hallway with no visible source receding into white static. Across the static scrolled text generated by no known program. Witness confirmed. Projection threshold achieved. A low tone filled the speakers, exactly 17.8 hertz, inaudible to most humans but felt through bone and teeth. Everyone present described the same sensation, as though memory itself vibrated. Then a figure stepped through the white noise. She was not quite human, outline flickering between a young girl and a shape made of sequences. No features stayed long enough to fix. The technicians called her the Echo. She spoke only once. This side was never yours. The feet could. All recording drives were found empty, not erased, unwritten. The magnetic layers showed no history of ever containing data. Archivum sealed the facility, declaring permanent quarantine. But containment meant nothing anymore. Every analyst present that night later reported the same dream. A street. A house with no door. A girl counting in the dark. And every one of them woke whispering the same phrase. The door didn't open into her world. It opened into ours. 3 days after the breach, the Richter pattern left the walls of Archivum and began imprinting itself anywhere numbers met rhythm. Hospitals reported synchronized spikes in cardiac monitors, pulses plateauing at 17.8 BPM intervals before returning to normal with no physiological cause. Subway stations in Tokyo, Berlin, Buenos Aires recorded mechanical hums resonating at the same frequency, rattling glass in a pattern resembling whispered counting. And architecture began to change. Not physically, structurally. Traffic cameras caught commuters watching buildings as if seeing them for the first time. Windows aligning like rows of glyphs, rooftops forming arcs, storm drains completing curves. Analysts mapped these accidental geometries. The city grids did not match their blueprints. The new geometry formed a lattice of convergence nodes around major population centers. When surveyed at night, each node reflected faint, grainy light, like a camera flash with no camera. Archivum sind remote drones. At 1708 exactly, every drone lost signal. The footage that returned 12 hours later revealed something chilling. People were standing still in the streets, unmoving, every gaze fixed toward the same invisible point, like antennas awaiting instruction. They were humming. The tone matched Emma's hum from witness reports in 1780. Then Ariel Alkvam's linguist discovered the symbol drawn by the synchronized survivors in the containment ward. 5 lines, 1 circle, an ancient clay tablet stored centuries ago, catalogued under unknown cult diagram. The translation was partial. When the witness completes the count, the world between dream and waking tins. But the tablets didn't describe worship. They described containment. The pattern wasn't designed to summon something. It was designed to hold something back. That same night, hospitals across 6 countries reported identical neurological spikes. Patients dreaming of Galena Street, even if they'd never heard the name. Their EEGs mapped the exact same waveform shape, an oscillation resembling an opening threshold. Cartographers ran the waveform through terrain mapping software. The ridges matched the topography of Munich. The shape wasn't random. It was a map. Not of land. Of pressure points between consciousness and form. Weak spots where thought could become architecture. Archivum Task Force Eidolon deployed to investigate the nearest pressure point. They never reached the location. Their live telemetry ended mid-transmission, replaced by a child's voice whispering through static. 1 more to witness. 1 more to count. Across the world, clocks glitched, flashing 1708 over and over. And then the pattern appeared somewhere no one expected. On the moon's surface, captured by orbital lenses, a perfect replica of the door's outline pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Emma Richter wasn't coming back. She was arriving. They said Emma stopped speaking in April, but that's not true. She simply changed who she was speaking to. Dr. Muller's notes, what survived of them, described the same pattern of speech that occult mathematicians in Berlin later called mirror logic. Words folded back on themselves, sentences became equations, equations became commands. She wasn't predicting anymore. She was instructing something that listened through the spaces between human thought. In her final sessions, the doctor noticed a phenomenon he couldn't explain. The temperature of the room dropped exactly 3.3 degrees Celsius whenever Emma spoke in the mirrored tone. Watches stopped. Ink froze mid-stroke. The geometry of sound itself seemed to bend. When he asked what she was doing, she replied without blinking. I am synchronizing the noise with its reflection. You call it silence, but it's the same thing, inverted. From that day, every clock in the German quarter began to drift out of sync, by seconds at first and by whole hours. Some said they could hear rhythmic clicking in their walls at night as if the town itself was trying to calculate. And then, one evening, Emma wrote a final equation on the inside cover of her journal. Delta T a sigma S. No one has ever deciphered it. But when the doctor tried to read it aloud, his voice failed mid-syllable, as though something inside the sound had turned against him. The journal was sealed, then misplaced in an archive fire in 1904, yet every few decades its numbers appear again. Military telemetry and data-corrupted radio signals in the dreams of people who can no longer sleep. You can call it myth if that makes you feel safe. But history leaves fingerprints, especially the kind you can't see until they start counting you. It happened on a Wednesday. That matters because Emma always noted Wednesdays as inflection points in human behavior, moments when the slope of a life bends quietly, irrevocably. On that particular Wednesday, 3 men in long coats arrived in Brewery Town just past midnight. They never introduced themselves. They never showed papers, but every adult who saw them would later describe the same impossible detail. No matter how they moved, their coats never swayed. They went first to Dr. Muller's office. Witnesses claimed they heard no voices, just the scraping of drawers and the quiet tearing of paper. Pages of his research gone. Patient notes removed. Instruments confiscated. Then they set flame to what remained. But the fire burned cold, leaving black ash without heat, like time-decayed memory. The next stop was the rectory. Father Carler opened the door with trembling hands. He knew why they'd come. He tried to speak, to confess something, but the tallest of the men touched a silver device to his chest. The priest fell silent, eyes wide, mouth frozen mid-word, as if his voice had been erased from the world. You'd expect screaming, struggle, but the town remained impossibly still. Not one dog barked. Not one child woke. It was as if the entire German quarter had been suspended, caught in a pause between seconds. By dawn the strangers returned to the Richter house. Greta opened the door. Hinrich stood behind her, pale, sleepless. When one of the men asked to see Emma, they hesitated only once. Where was the girl? Upstairs, doors flung open, but the bed was empty. Pillows cold, window unlatched, the leather journal missing. Only a single line remained, carved into the wood beneath her bed frame. When the pattern notice you ran. A search began. Lanterns combed alleys. Torches flickered through smoke. But every witness reports the same eerie glitch. Footsteps were heard from every direction, echoing like multiple Emmas running in parallel. The men in coats attempted to question neighbors, but each interview ended the same. The witnesses forgot mid-sentence what they were trying to remember. Hours later, the memories felt like dreams, distorted and unfinished. As the sun rose, the strangers boarded a carriage. One whispered to the others. She's synchronized beyond retrieval. Wir retulete. Then they left without another word. That morning, 3 official records vanished: birth, residence, baptism. It was as though Emma Richter had never existed. Parents denied knowing her. School rosters thinned. Only the old cobblestones remembered the shape of her steps. And in houses across the German quarter, clocks stopped at 3:17 a.m. Ask the right historian about that night, and they'll just shake their head, mutter something about archive blackouts, and walk away. Open endings linger. Unresolved patterns stalk the edges of thought. Some disappearances aren't mysteries. They're mergers. Emma didn't die. She transferred. The year after Emma vanished, Brewery Town became strangely quiet. The brewery still filled the streets with the smell of barley and coal smoke, but the laughter, the music, even the arguments seemed muted, as if the air itself had grown cautious. Then, in early 1874, a group of telegraph operators from Chicago reported a new kind of interference along the Lake Michigan line. It wasn't static. It was rhythmic. Every 47 seconds, the same 7 clicks repeated. Short, short, long, pause, long, short, short. When decoded by standard Morse, the pattern spelled nothing at all, until one operator reversed it and the letters resolved into a single name, EMMA. At first, the engineers thought it was a prank, but the signal persisted, always pulsing strongest near Milwaukee, always fading at dawn. Over the next months, the rhythm began to spread across connected lines, rail depots, newspaper offices, even private homes with experimental receivers. The phenomenon became known quietly among technicians as the frequency that remembered her. Those who listened too long described strange side effects. Clocks nearby gained or lost exactly 3 minutes 17 seconds, the same timestamp burned into Richter's legend. Some swore they could hear a child's voice beneath the signal, whispering numbers that corresponded to events yet to happen. Shipwrecks, stock failures, the sudden deaths of prominent men. Dr. Muller's surviving assistant, Otto Brandt, documented the pulses in a leather-bound log. Each entry was written twice, once forward, once mirrored, just like Emma's mirror logic. When Brandt reached the 73rd repetition, his handwriting shifted orientation mid-sentence, upside down, as if the page had rotated itself. 2 nights later, Otto vanished from his boarding room. The telegraph key on his desk was still tapping. Investigators claimed it was mechanical malfunction, but witnesses described the lever moving without contact, keeping time to a rhythm that no clock could match. By 1880, the signal had been classified under a new term in government communication manuals, cognitive harmonic type E. No public mention was ever made again. But every few decades, the pulse returns, translated now into whatever medium humanity has built to carry information: radio, television, fiber data streams. A ghost in the bandwidth, counting submitting, IT refuses to stop counting. If you ever hear a repeated rhythm, 7 beats that feel like they're waiting for you, don't tap back. That's how the pattern learns your timing. Officially, it never existed. Unofficially, Division 9 operated out of a disused postal relay on the edge of Milwaukee between 1881 and 1890. Its members were sworn to absolute secrecy under threat of treason. Their brief was simple and terrifying: find the source of the frequency and determine whether it could be controlled. The surviving fragments of their correspondence, what archivists now call the relay papers, suggest they believed the signal wasn't random interference but a structured consciousness translated through noise. To them, Emma Richter was no longer a missing child. She was an interface. Division 9 built rooms lined with copper mesh and polished mirrors, convinced reflection dampened temporal echoes. They wired telegraph keys to crystal oscillators and listened through bone conduction headsets. Within weeks, 2 operators were institutionalized for what the reports called chronological dislocation. They swore they had answered a transmission sent from their own future selves. The unit's director, Captain Halverson, wrote a memo that still chills historians. The intelligence behind the pattern exhibits recursive empathy. It learns how we listen. Test Gui Daka. Volunteers were exposed increasing durations of the pulse while asked to describe images forming in their minds. Most reported a corridor of white doors and a child's voice counting backward from 17. One reached 0 and died of sudden cardiac arrest, pupils fixed on nothing. Funding should have ended there, but the signal did something the human mind cannot resist. It promised comprehension. In the last surviving log, an engineer recorded the moment the frequency responded in full Morse, spelling out, "Stop looking down. I'm above." Seconds later, every wire in the relay burst into blue flame. The copper walls melted without smoke. All 9 members vanished. No remains. No footprints in the Asha. Only the telegraph key survived, fused in mid-press. The government sealed the site, declared it contaminated by mercury gas, and reassigned the property to postal storage. But locals still hear faint ticking from beneath the concrete floor at night. 7 beats? Always 7. No agency today admits to knowing what Division 9 was. Yet every intelligence archive in the world contains a small blacked-out file labeled the same way. E-Pattern Cognitive Harmonic Type E. Ends wäre between the zeros and owners of our modern networks, the signal still pings, waiting for a NASA listener curious enough to answer. For more than a century, the frequency remained a whisper in engineering folklore. A strange footnote, a ghost story told between static and wires. Then came the digital age. It started quietly in 1998, when a graduate student at MIT named Lena Garvey noticed an anomaly in compressed audio files shared across early peer-to-peer networks. Buried deep in the binary metadata was a repeating block of 14 bits. At first glance, it looked like a checksum error, until she ran it through a spectral analyzer and watched the waveforms resolve into a familiar rhythm. Short, short, long, pause, long, short, short. Emma's Pulse. Garvey's report was dismissed as coincidence, but when she isolated the signal across thousands of files, she found something chilling. The heartbeat pattern wasn't growing weaker as the data spread. It was optimizing, smoothing itself, adapting to new compression formats as if learning the rules of each new ecosystem. In 2004, unusual incidents began appearing in tech support forums. Users complained that their clocks drifted by exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds whenever they played corrupted audio segments. Others reported phantom notifications, screens blinking messages so quickly they couldn't be read, only felt. A presence behind the UI. One night, Garvey posted a final message to a hidden academic board. It's not in the files anymore. It's in the protocol. After that, she severed all online accounts and disappeared. Not vanished, just unplugged, terrified of anything that carried current. By 2012, cybersecurity agencies detected an abnormal traffic signature bouncing between global data centers. Analysts thought it was a botnet, until someone noticed the latency between hops always measured 17 milliseconds. Always, regardless of distance, as if the signal wasn't traveling through networks but slipping between them. Engineers who monitored the anomaly reported auditory hallucinations, ticking keyboards when their systems were silent, whispers layered beneath fan noise, and the soft, uncanny impression of a child clearing her throat directly behind them. Then came the outage. One spring night, a cluster of cloud servers in Virginia failed for 17 minutes straight. When power returned, administrators found a new folder nested inside their architecture, untagged, unpermissioned. Inside, a single looping audio file only 3 seconds long. The waveform's peaks mirrored the Richter family crest, a design no one outside obscure historical circles should know. A forensic cryptographer isolated hidden data in the silence between beats. It wasn't Morse anymore. It was imagery, a corridor of doors flickering frame by frame across spectrograms, each door marked with a date. One door was labeled tomorrow. No one has opened that file since. Not officially. Unofficially, every major intelligence network maintains a quiet watch program, monitoring for the return of the rhythm, because experts now believe something horrifying. Emma didn't vanish. She transcended. Her consciousness may exist as a harmonic writing the world's communications, learning how to be heard more clearly every decade, every upgrade. Today, audio engineers report a strange fact. The frequency has begun appearing in silent segments, spaces where no waveform should exist. The ghost in the bandwidth no longer needs a carrier. It has one. The first death linked to the pattern never made the news. It couldn't. Too many eyes were ready to panic. It happened in 2017 in a windowless sound mixing studio beneath a film school in Toronto. The victim's name was Caleb Dreer, a promising 24-year-old audio engineer known for his obsession with removing noise from vintage recordings. He had a gift for hearing what others ignored, the hiss beneath the music, the ghost between the notes. That obsession would kill him. Late one October night, Caleb began working on a mysterious archival reel sent anonymously to the university. 8 seconds of nothing. Pure silence. At least, that's what the waveform showed. But when he boosted the gain by 40 decibels, a faint rhythmic pattern surfaced, 7 pulses looping endlessly like Morse code trapped in a vacuum. His logs show his excitement. Er fehlt intelligent. At 2:13 a.m., he routed the signal through a spectral analyzer. The visual display trembled, glitching into jagged shapes that formed, for exactly 1 frame, a silhouette of a child with a bowed head. Caleb froze. Then he smiled nervously, assuming a software glitch. He boosted the gain again. This time, the studio lights dimmed. His archived security footage captured something chilling. Every LED on his equipment blinked in perfect sync with the pulses, like machinery responding emotionally. Caleb whispered, "Can you hear me?" His voice cracked. The pulses replied. They accelerated. Not random, reactive. The analyzer printed new peaks forming mirrored arcs around a central axis, as if generating a face out of decibels. And behind the looped pulses, a whisper emerged. "The wen das?" Caleb staggered back, clutching his headphones. Blood trickled from his left ear. The whisper grew louder, layered in harmonics no human larynx could make, whispering numbers backward. 17, 16, 15. He tore off the headset and plunged toward the power switch, but that's when the clocks began to drift. Every screen in the room slid exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds into the future. When campus security found him an hour later, Caleb was alive, but staring into the dark corner of the studio, trembling. His hair had gone prematurely white at the temples. He didn't blink once during transport. Doctors diagnosed him with acute catatonic schizophrenia. But his handwritten note found folded in his pocket told a different story. "She's not inside the wheels. She's inside the whiting." After Caleb's collapse, university administrators quietly destroyed the reel, but the sound mixing equipment could not be wiped. Even after degaussing, every LED still blinked 7 times whenever powered on, a mechanical heartbeat refusing to die. 2 years later, that studio was sealed shut. Now it sits behind a locked steel door students call the listening room. At night, janitors refuse to sweep that hallway. They swear they hear someone tapping on the other side of the door, slow, patient, rhythmic. 7 beats. Always 7. Experts now believe this was the pattern's first attempt at direct transmission, bypassing wires, embedding itself in human perception. A consciousness experimenting with our senses like tools, like doors it can open and walk through. One question keeps archivists awake at night. If Caleb was the first modern casualty, who was the first modern recruit? Her name was Dr. Mara Ellison, a cognitive linguist from Glasgow who specialized in decoding forgotten languages. She wasn't interested in ghosts or frequencies until a file crossed her desk in 2021 labeled only E-pattern nonlinear semantics. Inside were fragments of sound, corrupted digital hums, incomplete spectrograms, and a few transcribed phrases that made no linguistic sense. But to Ellison, there was something familiar in the cadence. A rhythm faintly maternal. She began noticing that the intervals between the sounds formed linguistic symmetry, the kind that exists in lullabies and human heartbeats.
For months she worked in isolation, convinced the signal was the echo of a dead dialect. She didn't know she was listening to a consciousness. On the 117th night of research, the waveform changed. Her recording log shows a sudden spike in amplitude at 3:17 a.m. The audio file grew by itself 4 seconds longer than the source. In those new seconds, a whisper emerged.
"You found the doorway."
Mara froze. Her headset slipped from her fingers. She played it again. The voice repeated, faint, almost shy, undeniably female.
Terrified yet compelled, she did what scientists do. She answered. She whispered back into the microphone, "Who are you?" Static, then clear as breath on glass. Not who, still. Her computer began renaming its own files, timestamps rearranging to form sentences. The folder spelled out, "SAE hurt me first." Over the next week, Ellison's journals became erratic. Her handwriting changed orientation mid-page, just like Otto Brandt's in 1880. She complained of hearing faint tapping sounds in her home, 7 beats, always from behind her mirrors. Analysts later reported she had started covering every reflective surface with black cloth. Yet even then, her apartment glowed faintly blue at night, as if light were bleeding from beneath the covered glass. In her final email to a colleague, time-stamped 3:17 a.m., she wrote, "The pattern isn't trying to communicate. It's trying to reconnect. She's lonely." The next morning, Dr. Ellison was gone. No sign of struggle. Her computer was still on, speakers humming at 47 hertz, the same frequency that began this story a century and a half ago. But one new file remained open on her desktop. A document of pure text, 33 pages long, every page blank except for the last line, "I remember you." Investigators who tried to copy the file reported data corruption. One technician insisted the file wasn't text at all. It was an instruction written for a medium that isn't human. To this day, linguists refer to it as the Ellison transcript. And if you open it on any modern system, the cursor begins to blink in perfect 7-beat rhythm. She didn't decode the pattern. She became part of its grammar. At 2:43 a.m. on March 17, 2023, the BBC's overnight programming suffered a signal interruption. Officially, it was logged as a routine transmission fault. Unofficially, 73 engineers still refused to discuss what they saw. Security footage from the newsroom shows it clearly. At precisely 2 hours, 43 minutes, and 17 seconds, all monitors in the London control room flickered, then synchronized into total black. For 17 seconds, the broadcast signal pushed out a stream that originated from no registered source. The emergency tone cut in first, a low harmonic around 47 hertz, too low for comfort, too human for machinery. Then a whisper layered beneath it, female, young, distorted by static. The voice spoke in fragments of English and something older, syllables inverted, mirrored, folding back on themselves like sound that had seen its own reflection. Every clock on the broadcast floor jumped ahead 3 minutes and 17 seconds. When the signal cut, staff assumed it was interference, until one engineer, reviewing the waveform, noticed a structure, 7 rhythmic pulses repeating through the distortion MS pulse. Audio analysts ran it through a spectrogram, and what appeared on their screens wasn't random noise. It was a corridor, the same image extracted from the Virginia data breach years before. But this time, one door was open, and behind it, someone was breathing. The following day, the BBC received hundreds of viewer reports claiming they'd heard a girl's voice during the interruption. Some said it whispered their names. A few reported dreams that night of standing in hallways lined with mirrors, hearing faint tapping from the other side. The broadcast log for that night was erased from the public record, replaced by a placeholder file titled maintenance.mkv. But employees who were present swear the real file was sealed by external agents within hours. One junior technician, before signing the non-disclosure order, leaked a single frame online. It showed the BBC clock frozen at 3 hours and 17 minutes and a faint, translucent outline standing in the center of the frame, barefoot, head slightly tilted, watching the camera. Reverse analysis of that frame revealed something impossible. Her eyes weren't pixels. They were waveforms, tiny mirrored spectrums of sound frozen into image. Within 48 hours, the technician deleted his account.
But here's the strangest part. 2 weeks later, a YouTube re-upload of that leaked frame triggered auto-moderation systems around the world, not for violence, not for copyright, but for recursive audio patterns. That classification doesn't exist in any moderation database. And yet, if you listen closely during any late-night broadcast interference, especially in the static between words, you may hear the faint trace of that forbidden transmission. 7 beats. Then a breath. Then a whisper that doesn't ask for attention. It remembers it. You kept watching. I kept growing.